Welcome to TriMet 101. Today we're not going to be talking about TriMet, but we are going to be talking about trains and how to fix what we have. It's no secret that the US has lots of train tracks. Well, if only our freight system were actually good. Freight is an incredibly effective way of moving goods around where they need to go. But don't forget, passenger trains exist as well, and people would also like to be transported from place to place. So, how do we fix what we have? Another question you could ask is, what are the next steps in improving our rail system? What steps do we take? Well, the answer is pretty much nationalization. Alan Fisher has created an excellent video on this topic, which I will link in the description and up here. There are a few good reasons to nationalize. Number 1, operation becomes simpler. Number 2, electrification becomes simpler. Number 3, it's more sustainable. Number 4, it allows passenger trains to actually get priority in all corridors. 5, removes competition between the other freight companies. There are more reasons as well, but I will cover these main points in exactly 4 seconds. Let's start with operation. Well, if you have a nationalized company running freight, well, then it means there's kind of no question who's operating what. The freight company. That's who's operating freight trains. Conrail was created several decades ago, which sort of had this idea in mind. But it took off a little bit in the northeastern United States. It was not very successful, but I feel if they tried to introduce it on a nationwide level, maybe it would have had better success. Bringing back Conrail would seem to be the next logical step. It allows the 4 freight companies who leave pretty poor states of repair and refuse to work together. It would kind of allow us to fix a lot of problems. Electrification. Under a nationalized company, it makes it much easier to electrify the whole network all at once. Well, I mean, we wouldn't wake up one morning and all the freight trains would be electrified. This would be a long process, but it kind of makes sense to start now. Electric trains don't produce emissions. Even though, yes, electrical generation isn't always clean, we are getting better at that, and I still feel as though that's better than constantly having diesel locomotives spouting out black fumes. The closest thing we have to a worldwide electrification standard is to have overhead catenary wires at 25 kilovolt AC, or 12.5 kilovolt AC in low clearance areas such as tunnels. A few areas, near Washington, D.C., I believe, operate at 3 kilovolt DC. So you would need locomotives that could potentially do 4 things. 25 kilovolt AC, 12.5 kilovolt AC, 3000 volt DC, as well as probably some diesel backup in case electricity is shut off, or if there's construction or repair updates to the lines or whatever that requires the electrification to be shut down temporarily. It's more sustainable. We live in a world where we must reduce our carbon footprint. Yet no railroad so far has stepped up to electrify their lines. What are we waiting for? Having lots of electric locomotives, you can have incredible pulling force and acceleration, which means your goods might be delivered faster. So this means more trains could be out at once, and it means that everybody would more or less be going through one freight company. It removes a lot of headaches. It's like we're stuck in the 1960s and there's lots of competing companies trying to do this whole freight thing, and nobody's electrifying. I would go earlier than the 60s, but we had electric railroads in the 1910s, so no, we're stuck in the 60s. If we factor in passenger trains now, well, then it makes a lot of sense to have the electric trains running on the system, because you have electric freight all over the place and passenger trains sharing those same tracks, it means you could now electrify the passenger trains. And with EMUs, or electric multiple units, you can get some insane acceleration with that compared to a diesel locomotive. So that means trips go faster, more trains on the system, and very similar benefits to freight. It would also become easier to enforce Amtrak's right to priority over freight trains. For those that don't know, an often cited reason as to why Amtrak trains are always late is because they don't own the railways. And so there might be another freight train on the system that Amtrak is having to wait for, because Amtrak doesn't own the trackway. But Amtrak has a mandated right to have priority over freight. But it's so hard to enforce that it almost never happens. So what ends up happening is the existing freight companies end up blocking Amtrak in some way, either on accident or on purpose. Or accidentally on purpose. If all competition were gone from US Rail, it would allow for much needed upgrades. Some tracks are in near disrepair, and lots of trackway improvements are needed. Rails, switches, bridges, signals, and more could all be replaced during this time, and we wouldn't have to wait for one freight company to step up and start actually putting in the work and putting in the money and going through all that they need to do to keep the freight system running. If it was a nationalized company, it would make it so much simpler. Also, during the time of all these track improvements happening, electrification infrastructure could be installed, and we could gradually roll in electric freight and passenger trains throughout the United States. Something that we got fairly close to doing over a century ago, and we're only just now figuring out, oh yeah, that was kind of a good idea, we should probably do that again. But we're sitting here just doing nothing, just accepting the US for how it is, and it's like, but it doesn't have to be this way. There are tons of examples elsewhere throughout the world, mostly Europe from what I've seen, that show that nationalization works. Again, Alan Fisher's video comes at this from a slightly different angle, but it's still one that I highly recommend watching, and really his whole channel is worth watching. So thank you for watching, and I've left a link for that video down below, so go ahead and take a look, and I'll see you next time.